Welcome to episode 54 of the Eat for Endurance podcast. I'm your host, Claire Schornstein, and for anyone new to this show, I am a board-certified sports dietitian, runner, and mom of two based in Santa Cruz, California. This is my first show interviewing two people at the same time, and I can't believe it took me so long, as it was a blast. I have returning guest Dr. Keely Pritchett, who is a sports dietitian and professor in nutrition and exercise science at Central Washington University. She first came on the show for episode 36 to discuss current research on a variety of nutrition topics, and she returns today to speak about two of her own studies, one published and one in the works, that examine the link between underfueling, exercise dependence, body dissatisfaction, and performance among endurance athletes. Joining her today, we also have professional ultra runner and scientist Keely Henninger, who is collaborating with Keely on one of the studies we discuss. Keely is an elite athlete with ultra, one of the podcast hosts of Trail Society, which is awesome, by the way, and she's also in the process of studying to go back to med school. Keely has been on the trail and ultra racing scene for many years and holds a number of race wins and other accomplishments, including being a member of Team USA, holding the USA 50-mile national champion title, and a top 10 finish at Western States 100-miler, among many others. I had a great discussion with these two amazing women, including on the importance of weight and body composition in running, the appropriateness of weight periodization in recreational runners, the prevalence of underfueling in endurance sports, and so much more. So much more. So without further ado, please enjoy my discussion with Keely Pritchett and Keely Henninger on their recent research on fueling in the endurance athlete population. Keely and Keely, welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast. How are y'all doing today?
We're doing well. Thanks, Claire, for having us on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Excited to chat with you today.
Awesome. So Keely, you were on my show. I can't believe it was January of 2021. In my mind, it was like a year ago. But
that's right.
I know. And you came on to share current research on a variety of sports nutrition topics. And today we'll be doing something similar, except this time with Keely, of course, and focusing on one main topic, which is the link between underfueling, exercise dependence, body dissatisfaction, and performance among endurance athletes. Did I get that right? Would you say would you characterize that correctly?
That sounds good.
Okay, awesome. But before we dive in, can you each share a bit about your professional and athletic background? Why don't we start with you, Keely?
Yeah, sure. I currently am an associate professor in nutrition and exercise science at Central Washington University. I'm a dietitian as well as a board certified specialist in sports dietetics. I work with our collegiate athletes here at Central Washington University, and I was a collegiate swimmer at the University of Alabama, and that's where I got interested in nutrition.
Awesome. And Keely?
Sure, yeah. My name's Keely Henninger, and I'm currently a full-time professional ultra or trail runner, and currently taking some school to get ready to take the MCAT to go back to medical school. But for the past 7 years, up until recently, I worked as a scientist and an engineer for Nike, doing everything from performance algorithm development for running to vaporfly testing, looking at running economy, all the way to female hormone analysis and doing longitudinal studies on female athletes and really diving deep into there. So I have a pretty vast background in more like corporate science in compared to Kelly's academic science.
Awesome. And you're also a podcast host, the Trail Society, correct?
Yep. I do host a podcast as well. So I understand the nuances with hosting your own podcast. And yeah, we aim to kind of change the narrative around fueling and training and body image in trail running, and hopefully, across many sports for female athletes and athletes of all ages, and to try to change that narrative so that, they understand that you can treat your body right and you can fuel right and you can still reach really high levels of performance, and you don't have to necessarily fit that original narrative that you were fed.
Awesome. And that really ties right into what we're going to be talking about today. And of course, one of your co-hosts, Hillary Allen, has been on the show before. She's amazing. So really stoked to talk to you as well as today. So how did you guys meet, by the way? Let's start there.
Yeah, so I actually put out a flyer on Instagram for another project that we're doing. So we had to turn to surveys with COVID,
Hmm.
which is how a lot of this research, I guess, evolved. And so this is a study that is very similar to the Olympic trials marathon qualifier study that we'll talk about later, but it's a study that's looking at recreational runners and collegiate runners. And so, anyways, I put the flyer out on Instagram, and I think I sent it to a few people, and maybe sent it to Keely, and she was one of the ones that was like, "Oh yeah, I'll share this, and let me know if you ever want to collaborate on anything." And so that's kind of things just evolved from there, and we started having, what was it, Keely, maybe a meeting every week to come up with our methods. And yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely like we were linked through our overlapping, ultra endurance and science groups on social media. And I was coming to a point in my career where I was leaving my day job, and I still wanted to figure out a way to, work on science and lead research and work on research to try to further the field while I was not working full time. So I thought this would be a really cool opportunity because I know that Dr. Pritchett has done, a ton of research in the area that interests me, and she's kind of an expert in the field. So it would be really cool to work with her on some stuff.
Awesome. So let's just dive right into the studies. Let's start with the one that you published, Kelly, that involved elite female runners who participated in the 2020 U.S. Olympic marathon trials. And then after that, we'll go into the one that you've been collaborating with Keely on, that's in the works, exploring similar topics, but among the trail and ultra runners. So, all right. So the official title of this first paper, which appeared in the International Journal of Exercise Science, is Self-Reported History of Eating Disorders, Training, Weight Control Methods, and Body Satisfaction in Elite Female Runners Competing at the 2020 U.S. Olympic Marathon Trials. Maybe we can just call this the OTQ trial for short, or study for short, or Olympic, whatever you want to call it, something for short. So why don't you just kick things off by giving us a description of the study and what really inspired it to happen?
Yeah, that really is a long title, and I feel like I was just talking with my class about this last week, about how the titles should be shorter.
They're so long.
We'll call it the Olympic Trials study.
Olympic trial. There we go.
Yeah. So this is actually a study that I collaborated on with Dr. Abby Larson, who's at Southern Utah University, and so she reached out to me during COVID, and we came up with this idea. So, well, actually, she had already the survey had already been administered, I think, before everything closed down. So
it was right around the time it shut down.
Yes,
right?
It was kind of luck of the draw that this happened. So anyway, so we were able to collect data on about 150 female runners who qualified for the 2020 U.S. Olympic team trials. So I think the number of competitors was around 400. So we got a decent sample. But in that, we were looking at self-reported history of an eating disorder, and how that related to body weight satisfaction, any restricting or reducing food 3 months prior to the marathon. And we found what was, I think, pretty interesting is that 32% or a third of the participants reported a previous history of an eating disorder, and 6% reported a current self-reported eating disorder diagnosis. Yeah. So pretty crazy, but possibly not shocking either.
Yeah, and that was kind of one of my questions for you is like, did any of the findings of this study surprise you, or did you really expect what you saw in the results?
I think it was expected. I think it just unfortunately like validates that it's still an issue in the running world. And so that's what I guess really led me to want to dive a little bit deeper and see what's going on with recreational runners and collegiate runners. And I think recreational runners are often overlooked, and it can maybe go hidden because they don't necessarily have access to, the high performance team or resources. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I
yeah.
mean, even just reading from the last sentence of the abstract, this investigation
Mhm.
suggests that eating disorders, ED, may be associated with weight control methods and feelings of body dissatisfaction in competitive female runners. Which, I mean, that sentence is not that surprising, right? I mean, it's
No, it's
pretty
not.
it's
Mhm.
pretty expected, unfortunately. But yeah, one of the things that, in reading it, and I brought up offline, the study does mention weight periodization, and
Mhm.
that when done using healthful methods to achieve weight goals, that it should not be labeled as disordered eating. So I'd love for us to dive a little bit into that, and we're going to get into a bit of a loaded topic here in that. But maybe first before we go there, let's talk about just that loaded topic of weight and performance. And Keely, of course, I'd love for you to chime in. We're two board certified sports dietitians, an elite runner and scientist. So I feel like we could have a bit of a conversation on this. So I don't know who wants to go first, but I feel like this is very much at the heart of these studies,
Mhm.
because I mean, obviously an eating disorder and disordered eating is about so much more than weight. I mean, it's a huge thing. It's not just about weight at all. But when we talk about competitive running or any sport where you're really moving your body through motion, cycling, all these, or aesthetic sports, etc., weight comes into play, body composition, all that
Yeah.
stuff. So there's some part truth and then not. So anyways, I'd love to kick off this discussion because it is addressed in there, and then
Mhm.
we could talk a little bit about weight periodization, what that is and what healthful methods are, etc. Who wants to start?
I'll
Definitely.
let
I'll
Kelly go
go
for it.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go, and then Keely can
Okay.
fill in. But
All right.
yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I think this is a great conversation to have. And while weight is a sensitive topic, I think, turning a blind eye to, some of the associations between weight and performance would really be like dismissing some of the scientific research. And obviously there's a fine line there, right, with underfueling, because there's negative consequences. So being sensitive to that, I think this paper, specifically, we're talking about sub-elite and elite runners, and
Yeah.
which looks a little bit different than the recreational population. But genetically, elite runners, they may just be built a certain way. But then also, like, training volume, we're looking at anywhere between 70 to 120 miles a week and strength work. And so over time, their body's going to adapt to that training. And so I guess the other point I want to make is that elite runners, they're not walking around, year round at their competition weight, or I'd prefer to use body composition, honestly,
Hmm.
but let's go with body comp.
Yeah.
And it is periodized and can be done, and we'll get to that later on, but it can be done in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Keely.
I think weight in sport is a very interesting thing because I think if we obviously, want to whittle it down to a really simple physics equation, we could say that lower mass would be able to move faster. But I think that we need to realize
Mhm.
that, when we're talking about humans and human physiology, that doesn't hold 100% true because, we're talking about utilizing tendons and utilizing our muscle mass, and we actually need energy to be able to move quickly and our most efficiently. And so, while I think about it, I think there's probably a weight range that is optimal for each individual athlete for moving their
Mhm.
most fast and effective way. But that weight isn't going to be standard for everybody. That body composition is not going to be standard for every single person. Just because, so and so is 5'5", that doesn't mean they're going to weigh the exact same weight as someone else who's a competitor in their sport that's the same height. And I see that, like, especially the younger runners, they use weight as a metric of success instead of,
Yeah.
training
Mhm.
to reach their own success and then having weight come later. Like, I think if we kind of try to shift that narrative of, don't try to reach that weight and that's going to mean you're going to be fast. It's like, let's train to optimize your physiology, and then your optimal weight will come. I think that's going to be a
Mhm.
better way to, get to your optimal performance, get to your optimal speed than and targeting this weight, because at the end of the day, especially talking about elite sports, like we're not talking about this huge margin of weight variation. We're talking about still a pretty minor window. And so I think being really nuanced there is just going to cause more harm than good for most people, if they stop, thinking about actual performance and just focus on that weight number. It's not going to be very healthy.
Yeah. And it's such a, as you said, nuanced situation too, because I like to think also, in addition to just like the physical aspects of things, the physiology, but also like the mental aspect, like that stress and turmoil or whatever is going along with being so restrictive or regimented. And of course, there's that whole part of like the underfueling and how that affects performance and training and racing and all that. But just like the mental aspect of just eating and enjoying food and increasing your, I mean, I don't want to use necessarily the word happiness, but I mean, you know what I mean though, right? Just like not having that like that burden of constantly obsessing,
Totally, yeah.
Right.
And I think, go ahead, Kelly.
Oh no, I agree totally with Keely that it's something that typically comes along like secondary to the training. I feel like we shouldn't have to work that hard to achieve this weight. So it should be something that's, it's not something that's like ruling our life, and it should come with the training.
Totally. And I think like we can all kind of agree that runners are pretty neurotic to begin with. And so I think, if you give them the allowance to be neurotic about their weight, like they're going to do that to their own demise. And I think, we don't publicize enough that, underfueling has a lot of negative detriments to the athlete, and it also might increase your overall weight. And so you get into this never-ending cycle then where you're being so neurotic that you want to cut calories and you want to control all of these things, but you're actually like fueling your bad behavior more because your body's then latching onto those calories and storing them as fat because it's in starvation mode. And so like we need to get them out of that cycle because like we're easily able to fall into that.
Yeah. And I know one thing I've been seeing in my clients or historically has been problems with like GI issues. And of course it's just prevalent generally in endurance events and particularly ultra endurance. And then you add to that the underfueling and delayed gastric emptying and just all the issues that go along with that. And it's just this horrible cycle that leads to all these other issues. So, you add up, kind of any kind of issue with disordered eating on top of that, and it just becomes such a bad mix of stuff. But yeah, I think this is like one of these topics that we could continue talking about for ages. I'd be curious if there's any, in terms of like research, any other relevant research that you've seen. Obviously this study we're talking about, but does anything else come to mind that really supports or goes against this concept of racing weight? Because that's something, that phrase is thrown around all the time. It kind of drives me nuts. But anything else you kind of like to add from what's in the research that you've seen, in the past?
Yeah, I'll start, and if Keely wants to add, but I think one thing is there's a paper, the author's Ackerman, and it was written in 2020, and they really, around the topic of weight and body composition, they really stressed in that paper. And I think that was the unique paper that had Lauren Fleischman maybe in it, and Trent Stellingwerff. Yeah, so that was an interesting paper because there were a few elite runners in the paper, and they really emphasized that it should really only be done with this weight periodization or focus on weight and body composition should really only occur at the elite level and in athletes who have a mature, positive body image. And I think that that's critical. And I think that we can assess as dietitians where are our clients. It's after having a conversation with an athlete, we get a pretty good idea of what that looks like. So I just think that stands out to me. And then there's another paper by Trent Stellingwerff where he's collected data. It was actually on his wife, who was a 1,500 meter runner for the Canadian Olympic team, and he has data on her. I think it's 9 years worth of data,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a super interesting paper, but it looks at her like periodization of her body composition and how they did that. And she, I believe, did not lose her period at all during the 9-year cycle and had one injury. And with that, they, with the weight periodization, so her weight did fluctuate and her body composition did fluctuate between like off season and competition season. But, the points they made is that they were ensuring optimal energy availability throughout her training cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been noticing that's a pretty common theme that really almost debunks the really nuanced weight goals of a lot of racers is that I know in Kelly's most recent paper, there's a huge range of weights, and there wasn't really a correlation with performance, and there wasn't like a one size that fits their like mental turmoil either, right? Like there's not like, oh, the skinnier people are more likely, or the people that weigh less are more likely to have eating disorders and all of this thing. It's like there's not that correlation. And I think even going back as far as some of the papers published in like I think the 80s around elite Olympic female runners, the 80s or 90s, they were showing the differences in BMIs, and the range for even those women, it's like plus or minus 3 or 4% body fat. And so it's like, while they're still in this small narrow range, women athletes don't have as narrow of a range of weight as male athletes do. And so I think being like, oh my gosh, your racing weight needs to be this, like I don't even think we can say that for somebody. I think there's too big of a range.
Yeah. And how do you, I mean, I know this first study focuses on female athletes. How do you feel like this changes when we include male athletes? Does it change at all?
I think to be determined. We'll talk about some of that, some of our findings.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing to me with males is I think they're less likely to report or really less likely to recognize that they have an issue. I think of some of our just collegiate runners that I've seen or worked with, and I am shocked at like how badly they're underfueling. And they just don't realize that it's an issue.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Copangelo's paper about the ultra trail runner mental health showed that, males were least likely to report that they were suffering from disordered eating, but they, filled out the disordered eating questionnaire and scored almost just as high as females. And so to Kelly's point, like I do think it's underreported in male athletes. And I think that, males don't have a monthly cycle that some women do to tell them that maybe something is going wrong in the short term. And so the downstream impacts might just manifest a lot later for male athletes than female athletes. Like you look at Ryan Hall's story, he was a phenomenal runner until one day, extremely far into his career, he just wasn't, and he was completely wrecked. And he didn't have any warning signs that were as obvious as they are for females, and also it's not talked about as much for males, and so he wasn't able to notice those signs early.
Yeah. Let's step back for a second, and Kelly, can you just go over when we talk about weight periodization, and like what those healthful methods would be, like as it mentioned in the study? Can you just kind of outline that for my listeners?
Yeah, definitely. So they in that particular paper, when they talk about weight periodization, they mention that it's likely accomplished through an increased training load, but from a dietary standpoint, some of the things that are suggested is a 300 kilocalorie deficit, and then increasing their protein intake up to 2 to 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. And then they have this sort of hierarchy of there's like 5 things that they would do to approach this. And one is like having the athletes keep a diet record just so they are making sure that they're still getting optimal energy availability. And then the second one is decreasing snacking on their easy days. And then third would be decreasing their carbohydrate portion size on easy days. And then they go on to describe a few other methods, but they noted in the paper that like none of these were actually necessary for this athlete. So I think my biggest takeaway is snacking on easy days is, you know, kind of one easy way this could be accomplished. And then just decreasing the carbohydrate portion sizes on easy days, which I think of those, the USOC sports nutrition plates, I guess those come to mind as visuals. But again, this is an elite athlete. So
yeah. How does all of this translate to the recreational runner? Like, or what can we take away? Yeah, and you can feel like I'm not sure, but just thinking about some of these themes, right, that we're discussing. And I know I get so many clients. I work mostly with recreational athletes, and some are very competitive, but I don't have a huge number of elite athletes in my client roster at the moment. Mostly recreational, and so many people come to me with, I want to lose weight. I want to improve my body composition. I'm like, okay, let's chat about this.
Same thing, Claire.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing.
It is. And I'm almost like, I really don't want to work with anyone that wants to lose weight anymore.
I have a disclaimer that I do in my intro calls with people, being like, so you want to lose weight, here's the deal. And as long as they're on board, then I'm like, cool, we can work together. But anyways, like, how can we translate some of these takeaways or findings to the recreational athlete? Because obviously there are thousands and thousands of, you know, competitive but recreational runners who are doing road races and trying to BQ or doing whatever they are, trying to gain advantages. And I would say, based on my experience at least, almost all of them are underfueling. But yeah, what do you have to say about that?
That's my typical observation too. And, you know, especially with females maybe who are approaching menopause, which is you know, so I think it's certainly okay to want to lose weight. So I want to, I guess, clarify that I'm not like 100% anti-weight loss, which, you know, I know is somewhat controversial in our field, but I think it's perfectly fine. But for someone to want to lose weight for health reasons, but I think as a dietitian, we need to do, you know, the investigative work with the athlete and determine why. Like, why do you want to lose weight? What have you done in the past? All of those sort of things need to be assessed. And so, you know, really look at that with the athlete on an individual basis. Because I've told athletes before that, I don't think you have turned them away from the weight loss goal. So, you know, performance is a goal. Let's focus on that. Weight will come second, but it really depends. It's individual. I guess that would be my answer.
I guess maybe a more specific question is weight periodization, is that something that you believe is appropriate for recreational runners?
No, not really.
No. Okay. Why? I'm curious.
I just don't, it's not their job. I just don't, you know, it's different. And where are they from a body image standpoint as well? So I would say no, it's just not as important. And Keely, I don't know, maybe you have a different thought.
Yeah, Keely, I want to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Oh my gosh, no, I'm on the same exact page. I don't think weight periodization is important really for anybody personally. But I can agree that it happens in high level athletics pretty naturally with increase in training load and, you know, focusing on better proteins and everything. But I think in the general population, at least from some of the studies I've read recently and our current study, you know, recreational athletes have a really high level of disordered eating as well. And I'd say, you know, anecdotally, a lot of people that I know struggle with symptoms of low energy availability, and they are not by any means an elite athlete. And I think it's because they're exercising to try to achieve this body ideal. And by doing so, they're constantly in this low energy availability state. They have these thoughts of disordered eating, and they're doing their body a disservice, and they're probably not reaching that goal. And so I think like giving them these outlets to periodize their weight and actually like be really neurotic and cut calories and all these things, just a recipe for disaster. And I think if you can build a healthier relationship with food and actually acknowledge that if you're eating really wholesome foods and, you know, listening to your body and eating when you're hungry, like your body will find its natural set point. And I love to say this to people, but it's like, you're not going to be able to sit down and eat 2,000 calories of broccoli. Like you will vomit. So I think you know, if you're eating real food, like you're going to be just fine.
Yeah.
But
well, that's
you get into this rabbit hole of like processed foods and those things, you can eat those for days. So like if you can just establish a really healthy relationship with food, people are willing to eat whole foods and, you know, nourish their bodies. Like the weight will come secondary, to Kelly's point, even for a recreational athlete. It's hard to switch that mindset because they're so far down that rabbit hole.
100%. And two things on that. Like, I would say one thing I like to focus on with clients is like what feels good in your body, because eating 2,000 as you said, it's like impossible to eat 2,000 calories. I mean, I guess nothing's impossible, but it wouldn't feel good. And even like eating like a large pizza, you know, like that's not gonna probably feel so great. Like maybe it'll be delicious, but it's probably not gonna feel great if you're eating like a gigantic thing of, you know, something like really heavy or whatever it is, you know. So it's finding that balance somewhere. And yes, maybe some days are kind of more towards one end or more towards the other, and that's okay. The other thing is like, it's shocking, or actually maybe it's not so shocking because I'm not so surprised anymore by anything, but it is kind of amazing just how many recreational runners but they want to lean out. They want to do all things. They want to basically have all of the same goals that elite athletes. It's like their job to do some of these things. And they're so competitive. And again, they want a BQ or they want a PR or whatever it is. And there's so much disordered eating, just so much. And, you know, I have clients where it's really hard to get them out of that headspace, just being so weight obsessed and convincing them to eat more. It's a battle. It really is a battle, even though they've hired me to help them. Right. So it's right. Yeah, it really is this kind of epidemic of underfueling that I know both of you are trying really hard to kind of turn around and get people to eat more and really nourish themselves better. But it's tough. It's really tough. And it's great to hear you both say like weight periodization is not something that recreational athletes should do, because I would say that people would probably disagree with that. You know, that many people are like, wait a minute, why can't I do this? Why can't I be competitive? You know?
Yeah. Well, I would like to counter them with like reminding them what the basic definition of fitness is, and that's like the body's ability to withstand stress. And so, you know, the non-elite athletes, the recreational athletes are working 9 to 5. They're having families. They're having all of these other stressors that count as stress. And so if they're also restricting fueling, like their body's just not going to be able to withstand to stress, and therefore it's not going to get better, right? It's not going to reach that optimal level of performance. And so like if you're not letting your body recover from the stress, it's not going to do anything. And so you have to fuel it. And you have to fuel it probably more if you're dealing with multiple stressors, because you know, if you're doing all of those things, you're not going to be able to train like a full-time athlete, but you still might have to fuel like one. And that might feel weird to some people, but it's like that's kind of what defines fitness, is the body's ability to withstand to stress, and that's kind of like all-encompassing stress sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, how many recreational athletes do you know, especially those with kids, who wake up at like 4 a.m. or whatever it is to exercise? They're not really, and then they're staying up late. And I mean, I know I'm certainly not at my optimal sleep levels.
No.
Yeah. And by no means am I trying to discourage that. It's more just like, I think when you're doing that, you have to be realistic with your energy demands as well. And that's not a time to start cutting calories.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's also like if performance is not your job, right? It doesn't mean that you can't have goals and you can't be competitive and you can't push yourself, but it's also understanding the limitations of where you're at in the phase of your life. And I know that's something that I'm certainly grappling with right now, as I train for, like, I'm only going up to 50K trail distance because I can't handle it. My body's like barely withstanding this amount with 2 little kids. But it's just kind of understanding, okay, you know what? This is where I'm at in my life. And it's okay. It's okay if I'm not going to be my fastest or I'm not this or that. People are like wanting all of the things all the time, and it's just not realistic. It's like you can't do that. I would say though that sometimes it's hard when you see, people out there, and this is just an observation of mine. And I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but you see like new moms or look at the recent Ironman winner. Doesn't she have she has a baby, right? Yeah. You see people who, although I guess, she is a professional athlete, but even like someone like Kira D'Amato or something who's like has a full-time job. You see all these people out there with full-time jobs performing at crazy high levels. And so I don't know, I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on that, like people who are clearly exceptional, who are accomplishing these things, who are also doing all these other things. I know we're going a little off track here, but that just came to mind. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's great, and again, that is their job. But it's great to see that. I can't imagine the stress that they're under, though. I mean, I don't know. It's a lot, but yeah.
I think it's like there's two sides to this. There's one being the devil's advocate that's like, for how long is that sustainable? And then there's the other that's saying, hey, you don't know their training. You don't know what they do in their free time. They might actually be training a little bit less than their competitors, but they're just able to optimize all of their free time. And so they're not overdoing it, and they're not under eating, and they're actually respecting the stress that their day job brings them, that caring for a child brings them. And so they're actually like balancing it instead of, oh, I'm going to go on that extra run when it's not what you need. And so, there's two sides to that coin. And I don't know which one of those that a lot of these stellar, mom athletes or athletes who are also working a full-time job doing, but there's definitely two sides to it.
Right? Yeah, I'm always interested in when you see people who like work, or even someone like Mike Ordian who came on my show for a second time recently. I'm always just amazed by it. I'm like, he works full time and does all this stuff. I think people are just built differently. Certain really stellar athletes are just built differently. But anywho, okay, let's segue into the second study before I go further down all these rabbit holes. Okay, so the second study is still in the works. This is the one that you guys collaborated on. And it looks at similar stuff, but in a trail and ultra running population. So Keely, why don't you give us a brief description of the study and the motivation behind it happening?
Sure, yeah. So like Kelly had said, I had seen her flyer that she had published on Instagram that was looking at, disordered eating and body image in female athletes. And I thought it would be really cool to kind of look at the same thing in trail and ultra athletes, but with a fueling slant, because I know that Kelly, is pretty much a professional in the fueling nutrition realm, and I don't have much experience there, and I know it hadn't been done before, but I also knew that fueling was really important for our sport, right? Like we can be racing up to 24 hours, and so there haven't been many studies done in trail and ultra running looking at disordered eating and low energy availability, and there's been none looking at all of that in relation to fueling, and so I thought combining the two would be really cool. And so basically with that as our idea, we kind of got hashing out the logistics, and we launched a survey with kind of the big overarching goal was to be able to provide evidence-based recommendations to the broader ultra and trail running community around fueling, and kind of highlight the importance of fueling for the ultra and trail running community and the impacts that it can have on the overall health of them. So that we can, increase their knowledge around the current guidelines for fueling and how important following those guidelines may be to ensure that they're going to be able to reach their optimal level of performance and avoid some of those negative health outcomes that are associated with underfueling. And so, we established a big survey around that and kind of did a social media campaign to get it in the hands of as many people as we could get. And, we kind of succeeded. We ended up getting 3,000 people to fill out.
Wow. That's amazing.
We were really, really excited about that.
Yeah. That's so awesome. So given that it hasn't been published yet, So I'm not sure if you're able to share the preliminary findings or much more. So just what else are you able to share in terms of what you've seen from the study? Or can you not share? I don't know.
Yeah,
You can share?
can.
Okay, good. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
and I think
So yeah, share the
I can
preliminary
start
findings.
and
Okay.
Keely can add. But another thing I would mention too is that we've got master's athletes included in this paper. Well, it'll be in the second paper, hopefully. That's the plan. So we did collect data on athletes up to age 65 and in males. So those are two differences, and exercise dependence. Forgot about that. Because I do think, with this population and running population in general, there may be some risk for exercise dependence. And so this first paper, we collected data on about 2,000 athletes between the age of 18 and 40. And we found that 42% of the female runners were at risk for low energy availability, and that's based on the LEAF-Q, which is a questionnaire. And then we also found that 42% of the female runners were at risk for 42% of all athletes were at risk for disordered eating. And this was higher in the females than the males.
Okay.
Keely,
whatever I forgot to mention, go for it.
No worries. Yeah, and then for this paper as well, kind of like I was saying, we found that the majority were recreational runners, and a lot of them were ultra and trail runners. And to Kelly's previous point, when we were looking at exercise dependent, which is another validated questionnaire that kind of quantifies your dependence on exercise, kind of like a dependence on any substance. We did find that over 87% of the whole population were classified as symptomatic for exercise dependence, which is really high and, again, not super unexpected based off Copangelo's paper looking at the mental health of runners as well. But the coolest thing about this paper, in my opinion, is that we also looked at fueling, and we quantified how many carbohydrates per hour everyone fueled with for different training run scenarios and race scenarios. So like shorter races versus longer races, shorter training runs versus longer training runs. And we're really seeing a lot of trends between these fueling scores, where like if they decided to fuel for these races or not, and the scores on the questionnaires, and that a lot of the athletes are not meeting the current fueling recommendations for longer runs and races. And so obviously, based off our own experience, this doesn't shock us, which I think you said something to that degree earlier when referencing Kelly's first paper, was like, well, that doesn't shock me. I think that's the general theme.
Yeah.
None of this shocks us, but I think it's not talked about enough. It's not verbalized enough. The industry around fueling is not aware of these missteps, I think, in the ultra trail running community, where like they're really doing a disservice to the community by not, promoting more fueling for this population.
Yeah. Do you happen to remember what like the average, or where maybe average, medium, whatever it was, like what most people were doing where they weren't meeting their carbohydrate per hour amounts? Like where were they falling?
I would say when we were using the current standards for exercise over 2.5 hours, the current standard is 90 grams of carbohydrates or more. The majority were not meeting that recommendation.
Wait, you mean 60 to 90?
Yeah.
It's 60 to 90, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, no one's meeting that.
Sorry. Yeah, just cut that out. 60 to 90.
So most people were not even meeting 60?
Correct. They were in the more the 20 to 40 range.
Oh, yikes. Okay. For ultras. Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But again, like every single, for instance, most of the gels that are in the ultra endurance space say take one every 30 minutes. So that would be 40 grams. So, that's written on the package.
Yeah.
It depends on the brand. It depends on the brand too, because I think was it Spring says, I mean, every brand has their different thing, and really I'm just like, ignore all of that and let's come up with your fueling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be interested to hear what Spring says, because theirs
I think
typically
it's
only
15 to
have
20.
like,
It's less carbs. It's fewer
okay,
carbs.
but theirs is only like 12 carbs per, exactly, 12
It
carbs per gallon or
depends.
something.
So, well, this is where it really comes down to which products are you using, right? Because there are products like Morton or Precision or like the real pure carbohydrate ones, which like, this is 30 grams of carbs or whatever grams of carbs is, right? 100 calories. Then the Spring one, it's like, well, which product do you have? Because they're all vastly different. Like, it's like, is it the awesome sauce 45 grams of carbs, or is it like Cannonberry? I think it's like 17 or something like that. So yeah, it's all about people. I think there's a lot of confusion around that stuff. So that's why it's always important to note the grams. Quick question. Did you guys track the calories per hour too, or just grams of carbs? Because of course on the trails, people consume all kinds of stuff.
Just grams of carbs.
Just grams of carbs. I'd be really curious. I'd be really curious if there are calories coming from other places, or if people are, I don't know, just kind of thinking from my own experiences in Keely, I'm sure, and we'll get into kind of what you do, Keely, but okay, cool. Maybe that's something else to explore in a future study.
That would be something we definitely want to study in the future, would be like a real life example of how people fuel. I personally think this is grossly underestimating what people eat, but again, I feel like we need to actually, we want to do an in-person study where we actually look at this in the field, so hopefully we can answer that in due time.
That was my next question, is like, these are of course all Instagram surveys. In like the best case scenario, what would data collection look like? Like if in your dreams, what would it look like for you guys?
We're discussing that currently, but I think, and Keely, please add, but we would, ideally like to have some ultra trail runner athletes over the course of a week and be able to observe their fueling during this training camp situation, and look at, some outcome variables, like how are they recovering quicker, because I do think anecdotally there's something to be said for fueling during your run and the next day, feeling much better from a recovery standpoint. So I think ideally something like that, maybe some blood biomarkers there as well.
What would you be looking at in the blood work?
We're not 100% sure. It depends on what we can do in that setting. So, possibly creatine kinase. I know that there's a study that looked at, I think it was mountain runners, and they were giving them 120 grams of carbohydrate per hour, which,
wow,
I'm still,
that's like, nuts.
that's a lot. And so
that's a lot.
Found a significant reduction in creatine kinase or muscle damage, which we know CK is all over the place as well. So
yeah.
I'm not sure yet in terms of biomarkers, but
yeah. All right. Anything else you'd like to share about this study before we move on?
Anybody wants to fund it, get a hold of us.
Yeah. We will make it happen.
Yeah, what's like coming off of what you've found, like what are like the burning questions that you have for future research, would you say?
Well, that's a really good question. Kelly, do you want to go first?
There's so many. Yeah,
I know, right? I mean, every study ends with more research is needed and blah, 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 right?
Totally, which is good. We, and unless there's multiple studies, like the one that I mentioned with the high carbohydrate intake amount, that's one study. There's maybe two that have been done, but like, is that realistic for runners too, from a GI standpoint? But I think recovery, like fueling during runs, are you going to recover quicker? And that's really where my love for sports science research started, was with recovery. So I think that would be neat if we could show that recovery improves when you meet the carbohydrate recommendations during exercise.
Yeah, I would definitely be in the similar pages, Kelly, looking at recovery. I think I'm also super interested in how, improper fueling during really, really long races impacts hormones. This is more from my anecdotal experience, but hormones and recovery metrics, just thinking about how awful I feel after like a really poorly executed 100K for like weeks and weeks afterwards. I would love to understand like the mechanism behind what happens there from like a cortisol perspective. How does that impact estrogen? How does that impact like how you're uptaking glucose? How does that impact your circadian rhythm? I just think there's a lot of like interplay between all of these hormones after an event like that, because you basically went like 20 hours without fuel.
Yeah.
And not much sleep and and a lot of exertion. So I just think there's a lot we don't know about how like this sport, when not done correctly, can negatively impact us. And so I think looking into like hormone pathways that are affected would be super interesting.
Yeah. Well, both of those things are amazing topics to explore. So I hope to see research on that by you guys come out, and then you can go back on my show. We can talk about it. Awesome. All right. So let's distill this into, as best as we can, of course, because I know these are big topics, into some kind of practical applications, takeaways from these studies. So, Kelly, one of the things you mentioned to me offline was that, both of these studies are really aiming to change the narrative of fueling for endurance sports. So when you kind of think about it from that, lens, what does that mean to you? Just kind of to the broader audience, what is the messaging? Is it as simple as fuel more? Like what is it? It's not, obviously I'm a sports dietitian, but I don't know. What would you distill this down into? And Keely, you can weigh in on this as well, of course. Just kind of the takeaways here.
Yeah, I think, Josh, just don't be afraid to fuel and see what happens and see what your body actually does. I mean, if I wish that I could replay my collegiate years and we didn't have access to a dietitian at the time, and I know at the time I was under fueling, but what would have happened had I fueled? And I just feel like I want to tell so many younger athletes this, like, just be patient with your body, let it do what it needs to do, enjoy your food, nourish your body, and the weight will do what it needs to do, and hopefully performance. I mean, you've got to fuel to perform. So I think those are a few messages I would send out to young runners and older runners as well, who still maybe have some disordered eating or this a disordered relationship with exercise too, which that's a whole nother topic, but not to go there.
Yes, and that's also a hard one with, like, whenever we talk about like ultra running too, it's like, well, like one runner, I'm like, that's too much exercise, and then I talk to my ultra running client, oh, so you ran for 10 hours, great. It's like totally different. But anyways, Keely, you want to tackle this one?
I mean, I would basically just reiterate what Kelly said, but I would say one of my favorite ways to word it to ultra trail runners is that we already are in a sport that require us to suffer immensely and to be really, really tough. And so with fueling, it doesn't have to be something that adds to our suffering. It could be something that makes it easier. And I think a lot of us, use fueling as a way to make it harder and to reject fuel that will actually make it a lot easier for us, and imagine how much farther we can go when we actually fuel enough for what we're doing.
I love that. That is so awesome. Definitely going to quote you on that one. And this, of course, is off topic, but I think the GI stuff, it becomes really tricky when people are trying, like they have the best of intentions to fuel, and it's just not staying in there, so like that's a whole other topic, of course, which I'll have to do another show on, but yeah, no, for sure. All right, let's switch gears for a second. Keely, with your background as, professional athlete, I know I could do an entire athlete nutrition profile on you, which I might have to do at some point and get you back on. But for today, let's do like a little mini version. So I'd love for you to just share some of your athletic and nutrition journey with us today as much as you feel comfortable. Maybe just how your fueling approach or just general approach to nutrition has changed over the course of your career thus far, and how it's affected your performance and recovery, and anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah. So I think my journey with fueling has been really, really long and it has evolved a lot over time. So I started in running out of college and I had come from a team sport background. And so running was very new to me. I wasn't used to running or competing for myself. And I kind of got enveloped in this community, and immediately I met some girls who I looked up to who questioned why I still got my period. And they said that, we train hard enough and we cut calories enough to not have a period. And so I kind of followed suit because I was 18 and I didn't have a team to look up to. I didn't have mentors in sport. I just started running. And so I kind of looked up to them. And for the first, 5 to 6 years of my running career, that kind of was my mantra of, how much can I control of my fueling to train hard enough to maybe not get my period, because that means I'm training hard enough and then I'll get better. And how little can I eat that I can still run, how tough can I be? And that was my narrative for a while. And, at first you do feel like you have a little bit of success. It's very, very short lived. And then slowly you just are on a roller coaster of emotions where most of the time you feel like crap because you're running on empty all the time. So you become kind of like your worst version of yourself, not only athletically, but personally and academically as well. And slowly, you just kind of get lost. And mine, unfortunately, had to accumulate in a pretty big bone injury that was from years of underfueling and, having some calcium leach out of my big bones. And I was sidelined with a pelvic stress fracture. And that really had me start questioning what I was doing. And luckily, I had a lot of really supportive people in my corner. And slowly they started kind of breaking through to me. And this is also coincidentally with my time as I start diving even further into female physiology. And I'm a really big scientist. And so when I start reading about stuff, I can't deny it anymore. And so as I'm reading about, low energy availability and the consequences of underfueling and all of these things that are actually really detrimental to performance, I couldn't let myself keep doing that anymore. And so slowly I started digging myself out of that hole. And obviously it wasn't linear out of that hole. It was kind of like, again, a lot of mountain summits and a lot of valleys.
Yeah, of course.
But I think, it was all trending upward. And so I would say, over the past couple of years, I've had a very good relationship with fueling. But obviously that really did start my passion for this field. And now kind of as I've gotten better at fueling, I've realized that, I can fuel a lot during races and I can finish them way faster than I used to be able to, and I still feel good. And so it's almost like it's an A/B comparison that you can't really deny anymore. It's just the days I don't feel well, I feel so crummy that I get mad at myself for not feeling well. So it's like I'm almost on the reverse end of it now because I've seen how different it can make you feel and how much happier you can be as a person and how much faster you can be as an athlete. And so now I really focus on, fueling during my races and outside of my races. And I think it has helped a lot. And so my goal is to help other athletes kind of find that path as well.
Awesome. What does it look like when you say fueling well, and especially when it comes to training runs and races? Performance nutrition is essentially, what does that look like for you in terms of like products or, how many calories, grams of whatever, what is that like? How do you define that for yourself? And obviously this is very individualized to you.
Yeah. So because I have a tendency to be relatively neurotic, which I now channel towards more productive things, I definitely don't count calories unless I'm racing.
Okay. Yeah. I meant more for racing.
Calories.
Yes.
I'd say one of the biggest things aside from racing I do now is 100% of the time I eat breakfast. It's a non-negotiable for myself because I found that I would wake up every morning, go run for 10 to 15 miles and then forget about breakfast. And so then you're doing the fasting for, a long time until you replenish those calories. And you can't really replenish that many calories throughout that shortened part of the day then, because that's an additional 1,000 to 1,500 calories that are just gone. But I'd say, during during races, I stick primarily to gels for races just because they do go down pretty well. But I do a combo
Mm-hmm.
of like gels and kind of like a water supplement that has carbohydrates in it along with
Mm-hmm.
electrolytes. And I shoot
Mm-hmm.
for around 60 grams of carbohydrates an hour. And if I get bonus through something at like an aid station, then I just count that as a win. But I never count that as like, oh, now I don't have to fuel. It's still always like, nope, you're doing the 60 100% of the
Mhm.
time. And if you get more than that, that is 100% fine.
So you're not doing any real food even for like really long things?
No, I do real food for really long things. I just don't race really long things more than like once or twice a year. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
feel like
sure.
that's not my normal. I
Yeah,
don't take
yeah.
real food on like, regular training runs under
Got it.
5 hours. But yeah, for
Wow.
like the Western
Okay.
States 100,
Yeah.
I was eating like quesadillas and sweet potatoes
Uh-huh.
and like some bars. So I was
Okay.
definitely incorporating some real food in there just because I think Trent Stellingworth said this really well. He was like, I think it was Trent,
Mhm.
when you're training, you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then you have whatever sugar you need while you're training. So why
Yep.
should a 100-mile race or a 24-hour day be any different? Like you should still try to have a time of the day where you have your breakfast, your lunch, and your
Yep.
dinner. Give
Yep.
your body
Mhm.
those nutrients and that diversity of macronutrients that it needs, and then have the sugar as well. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of what I tried to embody for Western States, where I had aid stations where I was like, okay, this is where I'm going to have this. I'm going to have this at the next one. I'm going to have this at the next one, and kind of make sure I'm getting that diversification throughout the race as well.
Mm-hmm. What are your current gels and sports drinks of choice?
Well, I currently work with goo, so I use
Oh, nice.
all
Okay.
goo products.
All good
Yeah,
stuff.
so
Okay.
I use goo gels, mostly the Roctane ones in like
Mm-hmm.
the fruity flavors. I did chocolate at Western States 2021 and have never been able to eat a chocolate gel ever again. It's like way too hot for chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
I just like,
and then
yeah.
the Roctane drink. Yeah, the
Got it.
Roctane's pretty good.
Yeah. Kelly, what do you use these days?
I like the
What?
Morton gels, and I like goo. Goo is like, I've tried so many different gels, and I always come back to goo. I like the size of them.
Mm.
I feel like, and vanilla, and what's the other flavor? The watermelon. There's a
Mm.
salted watermelon. Those are the two
Okay.
that I like.
Do you supplement any electrolytes or do anything else for salt?
Do I?
Mhm.
I use the Scratch Clear hydration,
Mhm.
but that's about it. I mean, this is for a marathon.
Sure.
Yeah, if I'm doing something longer, I probably would.
Yeah. So you have CIM coming up. Keely, what are you training for anything right now?
I actually am just signing up now to do Black Canyon's 100K in February. So,
Ooh,
yep,
exciting.
Exciting.
Awesome.
gonna go
And
for
so,
that ticket.
yeah.
So,
Oh, nice. Okay, so you're trying to get back into Western States. Wonderful.
Yeah.
And last question for you, Keely. With all the fueling stuff, because you've of course had, some amazing success as a runner and you've gotten lots of podiums and such. Like, how has your fueling story kind of played into that? I obviously can't remember everything, all your placements, but there's a Lake Sonoma 50 and there that comes to mind because I think I'm going to do the marathon next year there. But, how would you connect all those things? Because you did find, some success even a while back.
Yeah, so I would say that when I first started running, so this is 2013,
Mm-hmm.
I still was moderately successful, but I pretty much finished all my races having bonked for the last, couple hours of them all.
Got
And
it.
so the first like 3 or 4 years of my running career in trail running
Mm-hmm.
were the worst of my fueling, and those were not my best running years. So that was up until about 2017. And I'd say at that point, I guess it was a little bit before my stress fracture, I had been at least working with a nutritionist to increase protein and to get my iron levels up. And so I guess I did misspoke a little bit. But so yeah, it was a little bit pre 2018 that I was working with someone to try to get my iron levels up. That resulted
Yep.
in me taking in a lot more protein as well.
Yep.
And I think that really helped my racing. And I actually started using goo a lot then too, because I started working with them. And so I actually found myself fueling a lot better in these races.
Mm.
But even like, winning, I think 2017 through 2018, I think I got fourth at CCC. I won Chuckanut. I won Lake Sonoma.
Yes.
I won the U.S.
Yes.
50-mile national championship.
Yeah,
Got
that's
top
what I was
5
looking at.
like 2 other 100K races overseas. Like, it was absurd. I raced like, I think 8 races, all over 50K, the majority
Wow.
50 miles or 100K in one
Yeah.
year, right?
Wow.
And that I broke my pelvis shortly thereafter. And so I think that pelvis break was it was accumulation of the load from the year, but I think it was ultimately accumulation of the 7 years prior of not
Sure.
fueling. And then that load of that season really just did me in. And then I'd say, from that season on, I've continued to improve my fueling, and it shows itself in the race results that I get to complete. But I do find myself a little bit more plagued with injury now that I have, I think a history of more disordered type eating, because my bones maybe are not quite as dense as they should be, and my body's not quite as resilient. And so I'm still like building up that resiliency and really figuring out how to run. And so, yeah, I mean, since then, I've gotten a top 10 at Western States when I've stayed healthy, and then I followed it up with another win at Lake Sonoma, and then I won the Gorge 50K, and then was leading the Western States this year and had to drop because of my ankle. And so I definitely feel a trend of fitness that now is like way better than even when I won Sonoma the first time, which is really exciting. It's more just like, again, staying nuanced and like making sure that I don't get injured and really, really stay adamant about that fueling. And so, yeah, but I'd say the years that I was really under fueling always were never my most successful years, because those were about 2014 through 2017. And those races were they always could have been better.
Got it. What is, I lied. I have one more question for you. What does recovery look like for you? Sorry, Kelly, I feel like I'm ignoring you.
No, you're fine.
I'll ask you more questions.
I'm enjoying listening.
Recovery for me is, I mean, there's a lot of facets of recovery. So I would say one big one is sleep. I try to get a good amount of sleep every night. And then I would say another big part is just fueling, after a big run, and then making sure to have lunch in the middle of the day, and making sure to have dinner, and making sure they're just filled with a lot of different colorful things, and just eat enough until you're full. And then you stop. And then if you're hungry in the middle of the day, I have another snack. And so, I never beat myself up for having an additional snack in a day because I'm hungry. I just kind of acknowledge that as something I need, and that it's something that's really important for recovery so that I can run the next day just as strongly as I did today. And then I'd say turning my brain off to running for a good portion of my day is really helpful for my recovery from running, because I think before I could just fixate on fueling and running all the time. It was like, oh, should I eat this? Or am I running later? Am I doing this? Should I eat this? Blah, blah, blah. It's like back and forth. It's so much stress, so much underlying stress in the system. And that does not result in very good endurance gains, I don't think. And so for myself, it's been like being able to turn the brain off from all of that and just, I take my running extremely seriously and all the things associated with it, but then I do it and I'm done. And I try to just not fixate on it later in the day.
Yeah. And aside from Black Canyon, anything else on the calendar for next year that as of now?
I don't have anything scheduled as of now, but I'm definitely gonna put in a couple shorter races. Leading up to that one. Yeah.
Awesome. Kelly, anything else on the horizon that you'd like to share? Any projects or any other races or anything else that we should look out for?
No, that's it.
Hey, you got a lot going on. Do you guys know? Yeah, totally. Do you guys know where the trail runner study is going to be published yet, or that's kind of later on? You'll figure that out.
We're not 100% sure yet, but we want to aim for Journal of Sports Sciences.
Nice.
And see. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. I am going to do, Kelly, you already did my quick bites questions to wrap everything up. So okay. Keely, you get a chance now to answer that. So just rapid fire.
I'm so nervous for these questions.
No, they're really silly. They're silly questions. They're just food related things. Don't worry. Okay. These will be the easiest questions of the chat. Or maybe not if you're like me and can't answer any favorites questions. Okay, Keely, what is one of your favorite meals or snacks when you're in a hurry?
See, this is already hard. Favorite meal or snack when I'm in a hurry.
So just narrow it down. One of.
I would say it's my go-to like yogurt with protein powder, chia seeds, banana, and almond butter. Just mush it all together. You can put it in any sort of container that can go with you anywhere.
And how about when you're not in a hurry? Do you enjoy cooking?
I love cooking. Yeah. So I would say my favorite meal as of recently has been this harissa chicken sheet pan dinner. So it's like chicken thighs and kind of like falafel thrown on a plate or on a platter with like peppers and potatoes. And they're all roasted in the oven. And then you make this like dill and cilantro, Greek yogurt, lemon dip, kind of like tzatziki-ish. And that's kind of what you use with it.
Yum. So maybe a cookbook is on the horizon too. while you're studying for the MCAT, so write some recipes. Awesome. Okay, after a race, especially a big race or really any race, what is the food you are like, I need to have this? What's your favorite post-race meal or snack?
I think my go-to post-race dinner is pizza. If I have a pizza parlor close, that's good pizza.
What's on your pizza?
Probably a white pizza. It's kind of bougie Portland pizza. It's not like East Coast pizza. Like I do love East Coast pizza, but post race, I definitely would prefer more of like a white pizza with like maybe it's like a balsamic glaze. It's super bougie. Arugula.
No, that's totally up my
alley.
Sounds good.
I lived in New York forever, but I love myself a white pizza. It's so good. Biggest cooking catastrophe.
Oh no. Oh, one time I dropped the entire cumin container into our curry that we were making for guests. So I just had to make like a 4x batch of curry. And it was still very strong. But we had curry in the freezer for a month or so.
At least it wasn't like cayenne pepper or something. At least you can salvage it.
I probably would have had to throw that out. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Most bizarre or exotic food that you've ever tried?
My dad threw me a Fear Factor birthday when I was turning 12. So he got all these really weird foods. And I think it was called star fruit. It's not that exotic, but it's disgusting. So
amazing. I think I've actually tried that. I don't remember it being that dramatic.
Yeah, no, probably just timing for me.
12-year-old self, maybe not so into it. How do you like your eggs cooked?
Over easy.
What's your favorite beverage?
Sparkling water.
What foods remind you of growing up?
Spaghetti.
What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Probably cookie dough or mint chocolate chip.
Top 3 items of gear that are most essential to your active lifestyle.
Sorry, top 3 gear?
Items of gear, yeah.
My shoes. Sunglasses.
Your ultras, right?
Yep, my ultra shoes, my sunglasses, and probably like a pack or a backpack of some sort.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. This was awesome. And where can everyone find you both online? Just throw out your Instagram handles or wherever else, websites, etc.
I'm Pritchett RD on Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah, and I'm Run Wid Keel on Twitter and Instagram, and it's Wid like gangster Wid. WID. Everyone thinks it's wild, and I made it when I was like really, really not good at social media. But I've decided to keep it because now it's kind of fun. So.
I did have a question. I was like, interesting. I was going to ask you about that.
Well, if you want to know what my first Twitter handle was before I changed it to Run With Keel, which is a lot better than my first one, it was Azamat, my boy, which is a guy out of Borat, the movie. So
I know what you're talking about.
Clearly, I had no clue what I was doing.
Amazing.
Okay.
Well, thank you both so much. I can't wait to read the study, or I guess I should say studies, plural, when they come out. I'll be looking on the horizon for those other studies. So if anyone wants to fund them who's listening, go for it. And I just wish you both lots of luck with your upcoming races and everything else going on.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you, Claire.
And that wraps up our show today. Kelly and Keely, thank you again so much for coming on the show, sharing all of your recent research with me and with my audience. I'm so excited to see where your study lands and what you guys get up to in the future. If you guys haven't already, I always ask this, but please rate and review my show, share it with friends, do whatever to get the word out. This is not a paid endeavor for me. I do it for fun, and just because this is my passion. And of course, the more ears I can get listening to this show, the more helpful it is. So I always appreciate your support. Until next time, guys, have a good one.